Hi, everybody. This is Lowell, and we're talking about basic sound system setup. And this final area of discussion, we've kind of walked from the very beginning all the way to the end here your final signal going out into an auditorium, into a loud system speakers, um, or loudspeaker system. So you have really an integration of two elements that you're dealing with here when you're talking about people's in an auditorium where they're sitting and listening to what's being produced from the mixing console. And really, there's various schools of thought about this. The human ear is used to hearing things in a very natural environment, a three-dimensional space. And so, when you put on headphones and you hear a stereo image, um, it that pretty much creates the environment of what we naturally hear in our lives. As we walk down the street, we're hearing in a three-dimensional space. Um, and so the difficulty when you're dealing with sound system design is how that integrates into a room. And so there are a lot of different, endless number of different ways to set things up. Some of the most common that are successful would be just a simple mono system, where you have one signal that's coming out into the room, and everybody hears, based upon where the speakers are aimed, a single signal. I had a situation where there was a room that was set up in a wide configuration. It was basically like a rectangle, but it was a wide configuration, and so the front, the stage was at the long end of the rectangle, and what that required is a very wide spread of the of what was being produced, to basically fan out on a very wide range, very wide scale, but not very long into the seating area. And we used a mono system, and it functioned quite well and sounded very good in that room. The difficulty when dealing with stereo, and this is something that most people don't really think about too much, but if you have a stereo configuration in your room where you have definite left and right, then the people who are sitting on the far left are going to hear predominantly left from the sound system. People who are sitting, on the far right are going to hear predominantly the right part of the sound system. And so the only people that are actually getting a true stereo signal are the people that are right in the middle of the room. And so that's not really giving a majority of the people that are sitting in the room a fair version of your stereo imaging. And so in order to fix that, there have been experiments, and sometimes successful experiments, of people that are rooms that are set up for right, left, right, left. And so you're getting stereo imaging, basically 3 zones of stereo imaging in the room. Another actually quite common setup that came from Broadway. The interesting thing about Broadway is that you had the need for music as well as clarity of speech. And so you had the dramatic element of a Broadway show of people, doing dialogue, and so that needed to be clean and clear. But that you also had the need for expansive types of musical accompaniment, and so that's called a left, center, right configuration. And so your center cluster, your center speakers would be essentially mono, and that would take care of the room in terms of the speaking. And then you would have your left and your right, and that would give you your imaging of some sort of stereo imaging. And so if you had somebody walking across the stage, you could actually pan with them with the left right speakers, and it would follow them on the stage. there are numerous configurations. There have been some experiments of doing kind of like movie theaters have multiple speakers all the way around, and that again goes back to the three-dimensional way of hearing that we naturally do. Walking down the street as humans, that we're going to hear that way, and so to facilitate that, where you have basically a surround sound system in the auditorium, and so that gives the people in the auditorium sort of a sense of spatial awareness. But the fact that you're trying to merge basically two different disciplines, the original, going back to how I started this whole series about the importance of acoustics, the way that presentation or music or drama started was within, essentially an amphitheater where you had people sitting around in a conical shape, and people heard in a three-dimensional way what was being produced acoustically. And so in order for a loud enough sound to reach a large audience, you would have multiple people. You have lots of different people on the platform, on the stage, that were, be a 200 voice choir or a 80-piece symphony. It created this big loud sound in order to reach the people that were there. And then as time went on, it became less and less acoustic and more electronically produced. But to have a room that people are expecting to hear acoustically, and yet they're being fed a digitally produced signal, an electronically produced signal, has basically you're trying to merge apples and oranges into a successful product. And so there's, I guess what I'm trying to say is, there's no perfect scenario where a sound system interfaces perfectly with a room, but there have been many really good strides in recent years to integrate them well. And I've worked with a number of people that really have gotten it down to a fine art of making sure that the room is set up, usually very dry, and to try to eliminate any kind of echoes, and essentially turn the room into a recording studio to where you gain as much control as you can. I know that line arrays are popular these days. In my opinion, line arrays work well in situations where you have a long throw, a rectangle that is long. They work pretty well for that. When you do a scenario like what I spoke of a minute ago, where you have a rectangle that is sideways, where the stage is on the long part of the rectangle, that you either a mono system or a left, center, right system works better for that type of scenario, in my opinion. But there's no perfect scenario, and line arrays have made good progress because you can actually aim and tailor make the exact part of the room in terms of volume and in terms of all the different parameters that need to be controlled, speaker by speaker, down, from the top to the to the however many speakers that are in that line array. You can control this distribution of the sound into the room pretty well. In my opinion, though, line arrays sound two-dimensional. I prefer left, center, right, because it's more of a three-dimensional approach, and because I'm a classically trained musician, I appreciate the acoustic, the attempt to create an acoustically produced type of sound. It's not acoustic because it's coming through the sound system, but it has more of a three-dimensional sound to it, and I like that. But everybody has their own opinions, and that's fine. And I don't think there's any perfect scenario. There's always going to be gray areas, and there's always going to be dead zones in the room. There's always going to be some seats that are not covered as well, and that's just the nature of trying to merge the two worlds of acoustic and electronic together into maybe, and I suggested this in a meeting, with a sound system design meeting. I said, why don't we just give everyone headphones when they walk through the doors? Then their sound would be perfect, and they could enjoy it and just sit there. And who knows, maybe someday we'll do that. I don't know. There's no perfect scenario. I do. I'll leave you with this thought. I do think that the more we move into the future, and the more that we try to understand the benefits of community and the benefits of music making, that we try to push back to some semblance of acoustically appreciated art product that allows us to feel like we are together as a community and not separated. The role of sound systems is basically to divide and conquer, to keep the stage separated from the room. Even nowadays, you're giving each individual band member their own headphones to where they're isolated and they can hear themselves well. It's like being in a recording studio where they can hear themselves well, and yet they're isolated, from the rest of the group and can't really play as intuitively in the same space. There's something about producing sound into the same space, and that goes for a band or a choir or even a congregation or an audience, that they have a sense that they're together in the same space producing something where everybody is influencing the other person and being influenced by the surroundings and the people that are there. Instead of isolationists, we should seek for community. And I don't know, I'm not smart enough to know how that plays out in terms of the electronic use of sound system design, but that's the direction that we should be heading in. We've made a big historical move away from all of that, and I believe that it's time to find ways that we can get back to what produces a community when you're dealing with sound system design.